Now, if you just started hunting the wind and you're now trying to figure this thermals thing out, this is the video for you. I'm going to talk through the basics of thermals, and then we're going to talk about how to hunt them, and then go through a little scenario of what you can look for and possible things that could really throw you off course if you don't know it. So let's get into it. All right, first off, I'm Mike, the Everyday Bow Hunter. Hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, hit the like button, all that stuff. Love to have you back for more videos. I appreciate it. So let's get started in the most basic level. Thermals, as you see here on this, is you have basically two mountains. You have a ridge line that comes down here and a ridge line here, and then you have a stream or whatever running through the middle. You basically have a valley scenario here in my very poor drawing. So what happens is, as the sun rises, the air is heated, and as the air is heated, it creates a thermal rise, and that heats the air and it rises up, and it can be different at different points in the mountain and stuff. There's different things that can create more of a thermal pull than other things. A darker kind of an area is, or like rocky outcroppings, will tend to have more of a thermal pull than others, because, you know, as they get heated, they have more reactivity than, say, an area that just a lot of grasses and stuff like that. So, but on the most basic level, when in the morning, as hot air rises, you have the thermals will push up the mountain or up the hill. So that's how it will go. And then on the reverse side of things, when you get into the evening and the air starts to cool, those same thermals will pull down the hill or down the mountain away from you. So you have a very, sometimes can be very strong, and it really depends on temperature shifts. As the temperature shifts from, say, we have, especially in the fall here, we have a big shift between, say, it's 45 degrees overnight, it's going to rise up to 65 degrees during the day, or even 60 degrees. That's a big shift. And with that big shift and that amount of heat that comes up, once that sun rises, you'll have a higher pull than you would on days when you have a smaller gap between the temperature range. So when you have a lot more heat change in the temperature, you get more of a thermal pull. So those days that you don't, you might not get as much, but they'll still be there. So for example, thermals at their strongest when you have lighter winds. So when you have that 0 to 5 mile an hour, even 8 mile an hour, 10 mile an hour wind, your thermals are going to be a little bit stronger. But the higher speed of wind you have, the less thermal effect that you'll get. It'll still be there, and a lot of times it'll create backdrafts and swirling winds, especially in mountains, especially where there's little, draws and what we call thermal hubs, where a bunch of ridge lines dump down into a drainage or something like that. Then you're going to have that thermal pull down really hard, and it's going to pull up really hard every day, just based on the geography of it and how tight those areas can be, and pull that together. So it can make it very difficult when you're trying to plan out your hunt. So your general rule of thumb is this: if you want to hunt a deer in the morning, when you know those thermals are going to rise, right, you want to put yourself and you say, okay, I'm hunting a deer here. This is the location that I suspect that deer is going to be based on my patterning, my scouting, all that. I expect the deer to be right here. Well, then I am going to make sure that I'm hunting above. It doesn't matter if you have a west wind, east wind. If you have winds coming, across here, coming like this, doesn't matter. That thermal's still going to pull up, right? So as that thermal pulls up, you want to be above that scent line. So even if the wind is the same way down below, right, and it's still pushing across that ridge line, you still want to say, okay, that thermal is going to pull up, and I need to make sure that I'm right here, and when the deer is down there. So that's how you want to hunt that. Now on the reverse side of things, same winds, obviously. If I have the same winds, it doesn't matter. And we're now in the evening, and I'm hunting a bedding area, and the bedding area is up here. He's on that military crest. He's right here. He's all happy. I want to make sure that regardless of these winds that we talked about, these winds are coming, so he's a west wind. So I have a west wind. I want to make sure, even with that wind, that I am hunting a tree below that deer, or where I suspect that deer to travel and come in. It can be tough when you have different trails leading in that don't quite cooperate with that. You know, they might come across something and are kind of, you know, defeating your tree by virtue where they're at. But it can really hose you. If you ever gotten, you know, busted, had a doe or something walk across you and blow and say, how the heck did I get busted by that deer? The wind's good for me. Well, since probably the thermal push took your scent in that direction, because with this, you want to position yourself below the deer or where you suspect the deer to be, right? Because that thermal is going to pull down the mountain even while you have these winds going across here, and this can cause a swirl every now and then and can cause backdrafts where the wind actually pulls back on you. If you've seen that, if you've been sitting in a tree and you're dropping milkweed and you're saying, how is this wind coming back on me now? It was just going that direction, now it's coming back this direction. Well, it's because of that thermal push, and you usually get more of it when you have lighter winds. When you have higher winds, a lot of times the higher winds, you get up over 10 miles an hour into 15 miles an hour winds, it'll defeat those thermals a lot, but it can cause even more backdrafts too. So just be cognizant of that. But if you get a good solid 15 mile an hour wind, very steady wind, a lot of times you don't have to worry about your thermals as much. But in hill country, this can still be problematic because especially if you get these thermal hub scenarios that I talked about, where you have a lot of ridges dumping down into a drainage or something like that, it can really cause havoc on the winds and create a lot of swirling in that area because the air doesn't have anywhere to go. It's caught down in that area. So you have to think about that. Now, I'm going to throw a monkey wrench in this whole deal, and we're going to talk a little bit about. Now, we said in the evenings, you want to hunt below the deer. In the mornings, you want to hunt above the deer. But here's the caveat. Okay, here's the scenario I ran into the other day, and this is how I hunted it. So I'm hunting an afternoon hunt, so I know I want to hunt below where the deer is, correct? So I want to be below because my thermals to drop, so I'm not having to worry about that. I have a west wind. I have a west wind pushing. This is my ridge lines. This is the bench, the military crest that I expect that the deer's on right here, right? I want to access this area, and I want to do it and work with the thermals at my advantage. So what I did is what I know is that even though the thermals are going to drop in the evening, it's what time will they drop. And this is going to be different every single day. So if you look at the forecast and you see what that crest is and when that temperature is going to start to go down, look at that and say, okay, this is what I'm going to plan to do. So what I did was I still hunted into the area. I came up the mountain and I positioned myself downwind. So I'm downwind from where the spot I'm going to hunt. I'm 500 to 600 yards, 500 yards from where the deer is. So I come up and I start dropping milkweed at that spot. And I'm there at about 3:30. And I'm sitting there and I'm kind of, you know, still hunting and just watching and waiting, pull my binos up, and the thermals are still pulling up at 3:30. The thermals are still pulling up. So I wait, and at around 4:30 p.m., they started dropping. So what I did was I sat here and I waited, and then when those thermals started dropping ever so slightly, I then moved down to my spot on a travel route 150 yards from the bedding area. So I moved in, and so what happened was I then had that deer come down to me and ended up being only like a 4-point. So it wasn't something I was going to engage, but it worked. So I had the west wind helping me, pushing my scent away from the deer here, right? Where the deer was at, in this spot here, or suspected the deer was at, and his potential travel routes was in this area coming down the mountain. So now I'm west of the deer, I'm downwind, and I'm below the thermal line. I'm below, and my thermals are dropping down. So that gave me protection. So that's a basic thing where you can plan on how to hunt. Now I've got another scenario for a morning hunt that I had the first weekend of archery season. Okay, morning scenario. Here I am. I'm going to go in, and I suspect that, I'm getting the wrong color. I suspect that deer are going to travel right along this stream bed, right, heading to their bedding area in a swamp area, right? This is their direction of movement. I want to hunt right here. I have a tree right on the trail, 15 yards, perfect spot. It's going to come right by me. And then the bedding area's down here, right? I'm there trying to intercept them on the early season pattern before they get there. And I'm saying, all right, I'm good, because I suspect these deer are going to be down through here at latest 7:30 in the morning. Because it's still early, I'm counting on those thermals to still be pulling down. And what they did was, as I dropped my milkweed, they were pulling straight down to the water behind me, because the air is still cool. So at that time, that air had not changed, the temperature change had not been significant enough, and it really just basically stabilized. And in a lot of cases, in most cases, it is the coldest time of the day when you get into that sunrise, or that early sunrise or pre-sunrise conditions there, where that is totally the coldest time of the day, and those thermals are going to drop like a brick because of that. Now, so you can put yourself in there. Now, the longer you're in that stand, and that temperature changes, you're heading into 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock, those thermals are going to change, and they're going to start rising. So that's a spot that you're only going to be safe in for a certain amount of time. And of course, counting on this too, I'm counting on the west wind pushing this way. So as I'm sitting there, the west wind is covering my scent, it's pushing away from the direction of travel of deer, and my thermals are pulling down in that early morning time frame that I'm counting on till about 8 o'clock, and hoping that it stays cool enough that gives me that window. Once that shifts and those thermals start pulling up, I'm out of there. I'm out of that spot, because all I'm going to do is have that push right into the deer. Now, that being said, every day is different. So if you keep checking with your milkweed, this west wind could be strong enough to defeat those thermals in that time frame, that early morning time frame, because the strongest time frame for thermals in the morning is generally between 9 and 10. That's when you're going to get your strongest thermals. In the evening, your strongest thermals are probably going to be around that 4 to 5 o'clock time frame, which goes back to that last thing I talked about. That shift comes, and now that drop comes with it. So this isn't every day, and weather really plays a part. You know, your lower pressure days, lower barometric pressure days, you tend to have a higher thermal push. That where you see, you drop that milkweed and it floats up away from you. You see that a lot more. Your large temperature shifts stay, like I said, from 40 degrees to 65 degrees, etc. You're down into, say it's 15 degrees and it rises up to, 45. You have a huge push there of warm air that might not be warm to you, but it's going to be warmer than it was. So that shift is going to change the airflow. As I talked about before, with your wind and thermals, and you're going in to, say, a morning hunt, and you're up the mountain here, get my green, and your deer is suspected to be here. As we talked about before, what do we want for that morning? Because of that thermal rise, we time it right, we want to make sure we can protect ourselves. So by offsetting yourself, you can account for the thermals and not have to do a delay like I did, where I went in late, right? So you say, I'm not going to worry about the thermals. I know the thermals are coming, but I'm going to plan for them in advance by offsetting myself correctly. And that's also knowing where that deer's travel route is. So for example, if I have a west wind, and now I want to get in here, and the only way to get in here is to come in from the downwind side. I need to come in from the downwind side of the deer. So I'm going to plan my access some way. It doesn't matter if I come across like this or up and down, whatever the terrain is, it doesn't matter. But what does matter is where I end up. So because of this, I want to make sure that my final resting spot is on a trail off where I expect that deer to travel. If I don't expect the deer to travel that way, I shouldn't do this hunt, right? It's all about knowing the deer's patterns and putting yourself in that position. If that's not a day to hunt that deer, if the winds aren't right for that to hunt that spot, then you don't hunt it and you hunt somewhere else, right? But this is what's going to happen is those thermals, as we talked about, as you get into that, 7:30, 8 o'clock time frame, in that 9 to 10 where I said it's the strongest, that thermals are going to pull up, right? And you are going to be in a perfect position because that deer is not going to be able to smell you because everything's going up and out this way, right? Your winds are coming from the west and then the thermals are pulling up. So you're going to be in a great position because you're downwind and you're up from the thermal level where those thermals are going to rise. So no matter how you get in there, as long as you get in there stealthily, you can account for both the wind direction and the thermal pull as that day progresses. I hope that makes sense. Now, I know I covered a lot of stuff. I wanted to make this a quick, down and dirty video. If you want more information or you have questions, there are a lot of different scenarios out there when it comes to thermals. As I said, you have like, say you're in a, an area where there's a blacktop, a huge parking lot or whatever, surrounded by high ground around it. You're going to have huge thermal push off of that because the amount of heat that's generated when the sun hits that blacktop. So that's a great example of things. Another thing to think about is rain. So when it's wet outside and it's really wet, it really dampens the thermal effects. You have less thermal effects when it rains or when it's really, really wet outside. Said you had massive downpours and stuff, you find, wow, I really am not getting a lot of thermals out here. They're just, my milkweed's just going straight to the ground. I'm not really pulling at all. If there's no wind, for example, you can get a real heavy drop to the ground in wet conditions. So all these things are little things you need to have in your mind to plan for, but the only way you are going to 100% learn it and understand it is to have that milkweed, for example, and go out there and experience yourself. And to sit here and say that I can tell you every single way every thermal is going to react in every scenario out there would be a lie. I cannot do it. You have to test it yourself to see it. So I hope this helped you out. I hope it wasn't confusing. If you do have questions, put them in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.